and welcome to another special edition of Inside the Parliament. It is another in a series of Politics with Value, where we focus on enhancing the capacity of young persons to become change agents, in addition to giving them a voice in decision-making processes in various spheres of influence, with the overall objective of creating a democratic political system which enables equal participation of all citizens. Today we'll be discussing budgeting and service delivery, education and the development of young people in Nigeria. The theme is centered around education and development of young persons. The United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development is a framework for transforming the world, including Africa, by 2030. The Sustainable Development Goal focuses on education and stresses how critical it is at ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promotion of lifelong learning opportunities for all. Africa's Agenda 2063 is based on the aspirations of the continent, which include, among others, a prosperous Africa, focusing on inclusive growth and sustainable development. It aims at repositioning and revitalizing education for sustainable development and structural transformation. To actualize the African Nigeria of our dreams, more emphasis should be placed on education to ensure proper development of our education sector. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought to the fore the necessity of a total overhaul of the education sector. More than ever before, we now realize that young people should not be constrained to travel abroad or attend private institutions to gain quality education, which are often beyond the reach of the average Nigerian. Therefore, to advance politics with values, education of young people is imperative. According to UNICEF, the over 30 million children who are out of school, if properly educated, will reduce the participation of young people in thuggery, political violence, and terrorism. Today's session will discuss issues around budget allocation and service delivery for the education sector, school curriculum development, and more importantly, legislative interventions on education. At the end of the session, we hope to have achieved the following: assessing the progress of education sector 20 years after the return of democracy, legislative intervention around education in the 9th Assembly, accessible school infrastructure and technology for inclusive education, opportunities around mainstreaming e-learning in Nigeria, possible intervention to reduce the numbers of out-of-school children, recommendations for reducing education tourism in Nigeria, and similar issues. And joining us to treat these all-important issues are Honorable Miriam Onoha, member, Nigeria's House of Representatives. Honorable Miriam, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
And of course, she's also a representative of the young parliamentarians. We also have Joy Aderele, Program Director, Engine 2 Mercy Corps. I hope I got that right. And Dr. Male Adoyi, a lecturer from Bayes University here in Abuja. You're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll take a break, and when we come back, we introduce our audience, and then, of course, we'll go to our discussion. Stay with us. My name is Uju Eje. The program is Inside the Parliament, a special edition in our series, Politics with Value. And of course, we have an audience here, along with our respondents for today. We have introduced them earlier. Honorable Miriam Onoha, who is a member of Nigeria's House of Representatives. Joy Aderele, the Program Director, Engine 2 Mercy Corps. And Dr. Male Adoyi, lecturer from Bayes University. All right, we go into our discussion. We would like our respondents to address us right now, and of course, our audience would ask specific questions from, of course, what the respondents would have told us this afternoon. Politics with value, that's what we're talking about. Let's start with Honorable Miriam Onoha, talking about budgeting and budgeting for education. How do you see Nigeria performing in this regard? Because I know that there's a particular percentage that the UN has specified, and Nigeria has never been able to meet up with that percentage.
Well, the issue of budgeting and increasing education capacity and for learners, especially as it affects the youth in Nigeria, with a particular reference on the 2021 budget proposals, I would like to say that a clear departure from the past, perhaps an improvement, is what we've seen in this year's, that's the 2021 budget proposal for the education sector. There is an incremental, an appreciable increase in the allocation to the education sector. I would also draw our attention to the fact that you'll agree with me that as the years go by or increase, our educational needs and gaps widen. So if, for instance, last year we had maybe a 40% gap, because of an increase in population and the dynamic needs and realities of time, it becomes increasingly higher. So what the budget for this year and the perceived or expected performance will seek to target, for instance, is to address challenges of the past and try to see if Nigeria will be able to meet up with the UN standard or statistics as approved for better provision of education in Nigeria, especially amongst developing countries, which Nigeria happens to fall among.
Dr. Omale Adoyi, of course, you are in the education sector as a lecturer, bringing up younger ones. You are even in a university that is somewhat privileged, but I'm sure you may have served in public institutions before going there. How would you assess Nigeria's education development in the last years of democratic rule?
Well, my take on the question is that there's a lot of issues with our educational system. We have not been, just like you said in the prologue, we have not been able to meet the minimum standard put by the United Nations, UNESCO, and other international agencies. Last year's budget, this year's budget, we have only 6.7% of the budget as of the amount, which is very, very low. We were thinking that at least we should be able to have 15% of the budget for the educational sector. But the Honorable, in her speech, stated that there's an increment. Last year it was even 7.2. This year is now 6.2.
So you believe there's no increment?
Yeah, well, the issue is not about throwing money into education. 80% of the fund, this 6.2%, goes to recurrent expenditure, which is a very unfortunate aspect of educational funding. This year, about over 600 billion naira was budgeted for the educational sector. And like I said, 80% of this fund is for recurrent expenditure. That means salaries, allowances, and running costs of a lot of parastatals that I don't know what some of them are doing. We have bloated parastatals in most of in the Federal Ministry of Education. And you can't really pinpoint what some of them are doing at taxpayers' expenses. Only a paltry 48 billion was budgeted for capital project for this year.
And education infrastructure is very key.
And it's very, very key. Students take lectures, especially even in tertiary institutions, on the floor. And we are talking even on the national level. When you go to at the state level, it's worse, and local government level. I happen to be a local government chairman in my local government, and if you look at the dilapidated infrastructure. Sometimes you see classes will be renovated, whitewash will be put on the walls, and after one rainy season, one wind will blow the roof off, and then the students will be taking lectures virtually under the tree in many communities that we have in this country. And this is very unfortunate. So I'm happy that the House of Rep member is here. What some of us, we in the educational sector, will believe that a lot needs to be done in terms of infrastructural development, in terms of capital development in the institutions. And it's not just that, even training. In most tertiary institutions, you discover that the non-academic staff are the bulk of the staff, to the detriment of the academic staff. And of course, you know, our university system has been plagued with a couple of strikes. If we are serious about budgeting, last year the United States budgeted about over 19.5 billion naira for educational sector.
Dollar, you mean?
Yes, in dollars, $19.5 billion. So the point I'm trying to make is that if we are serious about developing, just like you said in your prologue, if we are serious about developing education, then we must develop the infrastructure. 13 million, 12 million, I believe the figure is even conservative, out of school children in Nigeria. I think it's more than that. When you go to the rural areas, you see that most children are going to the farm, most children are engaged in menial jobs just to sustain the living, the income of the family, especially the girl child, especially in the northern part of this country. So we have to do a lot to boost basic education. The Universal Basic Education Commission, UBEC, that was set up by government, a lot of bureaucracy has cropped in. And I'm not trying to indict any public institutions, but the impact, the government need to take a holistic review of the impact of some of these agencies that it has created. To make an audit, to carry out a forensic audit of what really, what successes some of these agencies are recording.
If they're living up to the purpose of setting them up.
Yes, because most times they get engrossed with politics. I hear that almost 300 billion naira is lying down at the Universal Basic Education because states are supposed to assess those funds. States are supposed to contribute some percentage, or there are certain criteria that have been put for state to be able to assess those funds. Then look at researches. Our educational system should be able to address our developmental needs and challenges in terms of research institutes.
All right, let's hear from Joy Aderile, and then of course we'll come back to those specifics.
Yeah, great. So I'm really happy that the discussion has progressed in this direction, and I'm going to be just picking up from where Dr. stopped to talk about, I'm going to be focusing more around service delivery, so because we're talking about budgeting. And so you're very right about the budgeting, so let me touch on budgeting. As of 2008, our budget allocation was 13%, and as of 2008, our education sector was already nosediving, and our budgetary allocation was at 13%. Now, this is 2020. Our allocation is 6.7%. You know, we are saying the need is expanding, which is true. Our need is expanding. We have more people in terms of population, in terms of children that needs to go to school, talking about access, talking about retention, completion. But the budget is going down. And like you mentioned, it's mostly for recurrent expenditure. So in terms of our needs, the demand and supply, it's actually far apart when it comes to education in Nigeria. So I want to talk about the role, what the international development has been doing in terms of service delivery, and then I'll now bring it to where we are now. There are things that can work. There are low-cost interventions that will work when it comes to our service delivery, when it comes to teachers training, capacity building, because you're looking at children that are out of school. 13.2 million children, 13.2 million children are out of school in Nigeria, the highest number in the world. Even the ones that are in school, what is the quality of the education that they are receiving? So you are looking at a lot more children accessing education but not getting quality education. So they're as good as being out of school. Now, when it comes to children in school, we also have a large number in informal sector because we worked with Agency for Mass Education, and it surprised a lot of people that go to informal school, which is also very valid, which is an area we should also look into, because the current schools we have is not enough. We talk about the expanding needs. It's not enough to capture the number of children we have. Nigeria is big. So now, let me come to the school.
When you talk about informal schools, can you just
informal centers. So
yes.
we have MNEC, who is the agency from the government responsible for informal education in Nigeria. And in each of the 36 states, we have Agency for Mass Education, responsible for adult education, informal education. They have centers in the communities where they train and provide basic literacy and numeracy to people, you know, in the communities. So when it comes to our intervention with girls, because we're working with girls that are out of school, some of them are in businesses, and some of them also, there are some unwritten codes where some people after a particular age are not able to go back to secondary school. If you have been pregnant and all of that, you'll not be admitted into a mainstream school. That's why these informal centers hold a lot of potential for Nigeria. So we worked with them in the communities to enroll girls to receive basic literacy and numeracy. And they have basic education, they have post-basic education, they have continuing. You're able to take your WAEC after completing their circle of education, and so you're still able to get education. But let's even talk about children in school. What is the quality of education? You understand? Our intervention has shown that there are low-cost, you know, interventions for teachers, building teachers' capacity, cluster level, school level trainings that ensure that you build subject mastery, you know, within, you know, in the school base, to ensure that teachers are able to teach well, because the quality of teaching will determine the quality of learning that the child gets. So if you build the capacity of teachers, a lot of teachers, before our project, we asked, when was the last time you received a training? Some of them 10 years ago, some of them 12 years ago. It can't work because things are changing, the needs are changing. The way you teach, you know, someone in the 80s is not the way you teach someone in, this is year 2020, and the situation and things around us is showing clearly. So there's a learner-centered methodology that teachers need to deploy so that children are able to learn adequately. We talk about inclusive education. It's not just about disability. Even abilities are in different, you know, segmentation. The fact that we have children in primary 2 does not mean that they all have the capacity for that grade. What is a teacher doing to ensure inclusion within the class, to ensure that both those with abilities, those with disabilities are able to learn at their pace, and they're able to, because the goal is learning. It's not enough for the child to be in school. So what are we doing to ensure that learning takes place? Because if learning does not take place, then it's a total waste of time. So the government needs to invest a lot. I want to say something before I drop about education. Education is the most important thing. In fact, when I look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, I tie everything with education. If you're educated, you'll be able to beat poverty. If you're able to beat poverty, you'll be able to beat hunger. If you're educated, you'll be able to combat gender inequality. If you're educated, you'll be able to partner. All the 70 SDGs are lying on education. We need to take education seriously. We can't be growing, our needs cannot be expanding, and the budget is dwindling. We need to take education. So we need to see it as life and death, the future of Nigeria. I'll just stop here.
All right, Honorable, of course, she has just underscored what a lot of people already know, except that the country has not been able to do much to change the situation. The human capital of any nation is the strength of that nation. You know, the SDG goals and everything are dependent on education. Now, you're a lawmaker, and of course, you have a very, very strong role to play in ensuring a quality education for Nigerians. We are talking about service delivery, the quality of education. What are the moves that the House of Representatives has been making to ensure that Nigerian children receive quality education, or anybody who is interested in education for that matter, and to implement the set goals for education in this country?
Okay, beyond the need and the advocacy for increased budgetary allocation in the education sector, our role as a legislature and law-making body is to be a part of the budgeting cycle, from budget proposals, formulation to implementation and oversight. What we have been advocating is not just about making adequate budgetary provision, but also ensuring that those provisions are adequately utilized to the in line with the line items for which they were budgeted.
That's where oversight comes in.
Oversight, and that is one of our key roles in oversighting some of these agencies. But I would come from an angle of an all hands on deck approach. It's not just about budgeting. Like you know, in the education sector, we have the government, we have the privately owned institutions and all of that. We are even aware that right now, with the outbreak of the COVID-19 and post-COVID-19 effects on every sector, education sector is not going to be left out. What is the society, government, persons, legislature, our collective roles in ensuring that the outbreak of COVID-19 does not affect the school enrollment or the performance of students while in school. We also will be, talk about the conducive environment for learning. I'm aware that a lot of students won't come to school because of poor sanitation, poor sanitary provisions. I had run an advocacy, global advocacy for toilet and sanitary standards initiative, and it will interest you to know that even when we make enough provisions to build classrooms and all of that, a little or not enough is done about sanitation, which will affect obviously everybody, but most particularly the girls. Assessment will show that some girls will not come to school when they're in their period, or because it's not usual for a girl to just go to the corner to ease herself. So it's an all hands on deck approach where both government and the private sector, public sector, civil society, and well-meaning Nigerians could come to help. I was also a part of a program where alumni association come together to see to the basic needs of the school and how to partner best with government and the relevant agencies to implement what is best for the people. I am an advocate of not just skilled labor, but also semi and unskilled. Informal education plays a very major role. If we only pay attention to formal education, then a large population of the people will be left out. There are agencies of government that I'm aware are doing a lot of training and retraining for people who have not gone through basic formal education. And if attention is paid to that area, it will take off pressure and a lot of burden on in that sector. And then for us as legislators, there's another key thing we've introduced, which we are trying to make sure is implemented, is a gender-based budgeting. And if we're talking about gender-based budgeting, balanced budgeting, it's not just about female or male. It's about making sure that whatever is budgeted is, in this case, education, cuts across all gender and strata. It affects both the men, both the women, and both the youth. You know, who obviously, if they are not educated, whether in the formal or informal sector, will lead out on the society. So I would see the effect of poor balance in the education sector as how it affects the youth negatively by way of social vices and all of that, so much protest going on. So I would encourage a lot more inclusiveness in coming together to ensure both formal and informal education so that the generality of the public will be carried on. Then this area of training also. If a teacher is not properly trained, is what she has or he has that he will give. Nemo that could none habet. You can't give what you don't have. To the extent to which you give is the extent to what you have. And after this COVID outburst or outbreak in the country, there has to be some sort of intervention to cushion the effect on especially the private sector. Like I'm aware as students and pupils are beginning to go back to school, I noticed that there is an increase in school fees. And we are talking about out of school and poor enrollment. When schools are beginning to even increase the amount for school fees, it becomes an easy way, an excuse for people to come out.
Also that most parents were not able to do anything
during
within
the
a long
COVID period.
period.
Also, the issue of security and insecurity around this area. Over the weeks, we've been talking about rape and all of those things. So the children or pupils need to be properly reinforced with confidence that their safety is assured while they are going to school. And then the issue of unemployment. There are some places where people would rather not go to school, but for fear or for the fact that their counterparts or their colleagues who are educated don't even have a job. But I would use this opportunity to advocate to people. It's either you go to through the formal education or you do an informal education, but you must have a skill that will guarantee your livelihood for through life.
All right, Dr. Omale Adoyi, she mentioned something that is also a very key part of the problem that Nigeria is facing in the education sector, the issue of garbage in, garbage out. You recall that there was a time that the Kaduna state government decided to sack a lot of teachers because of poor qualification. Now, I don't know the end result of that issue because it was drawn for a long time. Now, a lot of teachers, people are complaining, are not even qualified for the work they do. Now, you talk with some of them one-on-one. I'm trying to be careful. What comes across is something you're worried about. A lot of them do not have what it takes to be teachers. Unlike maybe in the 70s, in the 80s, it's like an all-comers game now. Some of them are not even trained in teaching, like the teacher training colleges of those days. Now, as a lecturer, in terms of service delivery, in terms of quality education, how can the country get a better deal? How can the country begin to weed out those who are not supposed to be in the teaching profession and also train better those who should be there?
Okay, thank you for this question. You see, in the past, the monitoring and inspectorate unit of the Ministry of Education used to be alive to their responsibility. There are institutional mechanisms that have been put in place to measure the quality of education that is being given out. But like most things with Nigeria, this inspectorate division, these quality measurement institutions have not been living up to their responsibility. In the university, we have the National University Commission that is supposed to regulate the quality of academic staff in most universities. And that, to the best of my knowledge, they have been doing it. But the question is that, yes, like every other human endeavor, there are people who, Nigeria, where we believe in gate crashing into professions that we are not cut out to do. And you find a lot of people who do not have the qualification nor the urge or the experience to engage in teaching, finding themselves in the profession. But it's an endemic problem. I know the National Teachers Institute try to bridge the gap by try to train even teachers who are in the system. And I'm also aware that there's the Teachers Registration Council, which was passed, and teachers were supposed to be given license to practice. Those are not being enforced the way it should be. So I think those mechanisms are in place. The problem I see with the educational system, both in terms of quality teaching, in terms of funding and all the problems we are discussing, it boils down to one basic fact. we are not getting our priorities right as a country, as a people. We are not getting our priority right. Now, why am I saying so? Simple. Why will you be budgeting billions of naira? Honorable is here, maybe she will enlighten me. Why will you be budgeting billions of naira for school feeding? And when the child who is supposed to go and sit in that classroom do not even have a desk to sit, does not even have a laboratory to carry out his basic experiment, does not even have the notebook to even write, to even take his notes. And then you are spending billions of naira on feeding programs, giving contracts to, so we are not getting our priority right. I don't know, I stand to be corrected. The rationale behind a school feeding program. I don't think children are not learning. I don't know the impact of a school feeding program on the educational sector in terms of quality. So we are not getting the priority right. That is just the problem. And because everything we do, we do not lay solid foundation. Everything is just playing to the gallery as it is today. I do my own, and then the next person. And then policies are not consistent. You put a good policy today, another government comes tomorrow, he changes it, he wants to be branded with the new policy that he's bringing. And that is why our educational system is the way it is. We don't have continuity of programs. We don't have a direct focus. Our priorities are not right. We give priority attention to things that are not enduring, things that do not last, and then that is why we find ourselves in the quagmire.
Now, Joy Aderile, it is a known fact, and we've said it here, that the budget allocation to education is very, very poor compared to global standard, or the standard approved by UNICEF and the UN. Now, even the ones that are available, how can the lawmakers further help to ensure proper and adequate implementation? You know, maximizing the value that we can get from what is on ground.
Available. Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I want to quickly pick on this school feeding, then I'll come to the question if you don't mind.
All right, then.
So I want to give a practical example of what I saw in the field. I went for monitoring. I won't mention the name of the states, northern states. I got there, and these children actually came into school with their wares, things they are hawking. They came in at about 9 a.m. and then by 9:30 they queued up. That took about 1 hour to 2 hours for them to get the feeding. Came into class around 11, wrapped up around 12, and they left. Tell me, what education can someone get in an hour? Something that's supposed to be for 8 hours. I come in, I use 2 hours to queue up for school feeding. I don't even want to talk about the quality of the meal that was shared. You know, it's not like people don't know what the priority is. I think people are not patriotic. People put their interest above the common good. It's not like they don't know what is right. Most of these people have schooled abroad. Most of these people are exposed, they're educated. They know the right thing to do. But they put their interest above the national good. And, you know, and that brings me to the question you've asked. Anything you don't inspect, don't expect. The reason why we have a lot of gaps where people can do what they like and sign for money and just do whatever with the funds allocated to them is because there is no mechanism for proper monitoring and then feedback loop. It's not enough for me to monitor to say, okay, this is what is happening. What happens to the findings? What happens to that feedback? There should be something we are doing with the feedback. It's not just enough for people to go to school and do monitoring. There should be a consistent, you know, monitoring of what is happening in the school. Somebody, if I know somebody is checking on me, I'll be on my toes. So there should be that system, and then there should be an opportunity for that feedback mechanism. Let me talk about my project again, because my project is a research project. The reason why we have to do it is to say, and we work with the government to say, this is what works. We have done this with 18,000 girls. You can do this with several millions of girls in Nigeria. It works. So we worked with the government. The government were our monitors. We didn't bring people from outside of the system because we wanted to work with what already exists. And so we have people from State Ministry of Education who goes to the school, to the cluster of centers where we're teaching girls. They go, they monitor, but at the end of the month, there's a connection of teachers and the monitors to say, this is what you're doing well, this is not what you're not doing well, this is what I see to be lacking. And these are things that has been proven to be low cost. You don't need millions of budget for this to happen. These education supervisors are already attached to schools. Is there a way to bring them? Because if I write a report and I submit to my ministry and the teacher that I've inspected does not have a means of knowing what, her capacity, her status, what she's doing right, what she's not doing right, what needs to be changed, then it's a waste of resources, it's a waste of time. There must be that connection where the person that has monitored, number one, the monitoring needs to be systematic. There must be tools of measurement. I'm not just going to say no, it's a serious business. I'm measuring through a tool. There's a metric, there's something I'm assessing. Then at the end of the day, there's a connection of bringing the monitors, the education managers, and the teachers and the head teachers to say, okay, this is what you're doing right. This is where needs improvement. That is one way we can really improve our service delivery in education. We have proven that to work. And we are telling the government, in the 4 states where we have worked, these are things we've actually presented this as low cost of what we improve the education system. What we have currently now, the budget is very small, it's not enough. But even what we have, if we manage this process effectively, then we are going to see a lot of improvements.
Yeah,
Now,
adding to that, like I said earlier, beyond the percentage or the volume or amount of money budgeted to education, what we can do in maximizing the impact of whatever we have now would be to involve more of the role of the legislator, which you're all aware that the 2021 budget proposals have been laid in the National Assembly. We have been made to go into committees, various committees, Committee on Education Inclusive. And this is the time where we would now sit with the ministry, departments, and agencies of that ministry to look at the rationale for allocating this lean budget in whatever you've brought. A lot of people have complained about the envelope system. If you look through the budget, you find out that there are yearly recurring decimal. Some group will bring purchase of computers and laptops.
Bring it again the next year.
The year after. If we are using this quantity of laptop and as we are supplying, then almost every store in that ministry or agency will be full with this kind of items. So I would want to believe that before we send our budget in the so-called envelope, we should prioritize them in order of priority, so that when it is being sent, it will be those projects that will impact more and that will deal with the gap and the current need of the moment. And that is one of the basic roles that we will play when we start budget debates at departmental levels, where we will now query these agencies. What will be your reason for putting so amount for school feeding? Have you measured to see the impacts? Don't you think that rather than put XY amount on this project, you can reduce from this and increase more on girl child enrollment in the certain area and boy child enrollment in another area? For instance, that way you will be able to manage or adequately allocate the lean resource that we have at the moment.
And would you not say that one very key area is the infrastructure, education infrastructure, like some tertiary institutions, even federal universities, they're still using the computer of the 1980s, when you and I know that things have evolved, a lot since then, and what is obtainable now, global standard, is way beyond what we have now. So we talk about education infrastructure. Even in the FCT, children are learning on the floor. They sit on the floor. So are you going to promise us that you will look at that? And then, of course, you have the power of appropriation. So what has been brought is one, but you can decide to appropriate, taking from this figure and putting on the other figure. What are you going to do as a house?
That's exactly what I've just said. That looking
Not
through.
Quite.
Yes,
Because
looking
we
through.
need to know
Looking through.
you're going to utilize your power of appropriation.
Of course, that's what we've done.
But let
to
me-
even add to what is available.
And most times, what we have, like
We'll come to you, Dr.
like my
Adoyi.
brother said, our discussions are not only targeted at just the committee level. We have a broad view of the budget, where we can look at it and say, this amount has been allocated to this ministry, for instance. We can look at how to cut down on this other and increase on this. So what you have as laid before the National Assembly today is a proposal. Yes. Is until we have gone through it, put in scrutiny and checked to see how impactful in order of priority these projects become, that we can make our input and then before it gets passed. And then when it gets passed, another hurdle will be the hurdle of actual implementation and execution of the projects. I would also let you know, like you said, that I need to explain the importance of the school feeding program. We are an arm of government that is charged with the responsibility of legislating, making laws, supervising in our oversight function to ensure that there is no rascality of the other arms and there is no waste of public funds, and that these funds so appropriated are properly utilized, stem out corruption and all of those. We observe some of these anomalies and irregularities and make appropriate recommendations. Right. So our powers would not mandate the government to choose this over the other program. Right. It is a federating system, and you know we have the executive will still have the powers and the right to
but
choose their program.
You
so
can
we
always
would
check.
oversight.
You can always check.
We would oversight and check where there's corruption or where there's excesses or where such programs are not impactful.
All right, quickly, Dr. Adoyi, because we would like to entertain questions from our audience.
I think the problem with our budgeting system, just like she has said, is that I see two things. One, the inability of the National Assembly to carry out proper oversight as is done elsewhere. When I mean proper oversight, I mean holding MDAs accountable and responsible for whatever money that has been budgeted, and ensuring that service is delivered as itemized. Two, the second problem I see is that the last year's budget was not implemented up to 40%, so that you even see the budget. The actual implementation of the budget is another big problem.
Well, so she's here because I remember the last edition of...
no, your role is to ensure that it's implemented.
The last edition of Inside the Parliament.
That's what we've been doing.
The last edition of Inside the Parliament, I actually asked that question. Well, and of course, the spokesperson of the House told me that it will still run till December. So let's watch and see what happens between now and December.
What of that of last year? And
we go into... but we all know what happened. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic affected a lot of things. Let's just give them some time before we assess them fully for both last year and this year. So we would like to take, we need to take questions from the audience so that we don't run out of time. So introduce yourself and ask your question, please.
My name is Anthony Chuka. Speaking about education, the world is moving at a very fast pace, and the role of ICT cannot be under or overemphasized. It's very important. So what is government doing to ensure that ICT is brought into education? Given this pandemic, we saw how some schools leveraged on Zoom and other platforms.
E-learning.
But lots of government institutions could not do that. And it creates a sort of gap between those who have gone to public institutions and private institutions. So how do we leverage on ICT towards e-learning in Nigeria? Thank you.
Let me give that to Honorable, because he's talking about government and you're a government here.
Well, we are all government at all levels. Well, talking about the issue of ICT, and we were discussing budget. If you look through the line items of the budget, you see that there is also an allocation to provision of ICT. Some of us in the legislature also have our constituency projects, which we have. For me, I have prioritized ICT centers in my federal constituency because I know that is a tool to build the youth and get them properly in line with the realm of the moment. I believe that other colleagues of mine are also doing the same. And the Ministry of Information and Technology is doing the same. What we now need to talk about will be the collaboration, interagency collaboration and synchronization to ensure that what this ministry is doing or whatever technology that is being developed, for instance, in science and tech, affects positively or is being used as a model to impact positively in the education sector, and which will affect the youth.
All right, so we take our next question.
I have to add to that.
To add to what
Yes.
you have said.
When it comes
okay,
to
let her talk now.
Yeah, when it comes to
because
education,
we still
we
need
need
to
to
take our questions.
we need to realize that education will not work in silo. It's connected with other sectors. Because I want to talk about another practical example around ICT during this COVID
You have to
for
be
the
very
girls that we're
fast.
serving. Even if you provide them with phones, there's no light for them to charge their phone.
They
There's
don't
no
even have a
power.
laptop.
That's it.
Yes. Internet connectivity. When you're looking at internet, you're looking at places in the urban area. There's no problem. When you go to the rural area, they don't have access to internet. So our development, when we're looking at education, we shouldn't look at education as in silo, but it's connected with other sectors, you know, of development in Nigeria. And so a lot of marginalized people don't have access to phones. Even when they have phones, they just have the normal phones that can take and receive calls. They don't have Android and mobile phones that can enable them to participate in virtual learning, because we provided virtual learning during this lockdown period when schools were closed, and we're only able to reach 25% of our beneficiaries.
So the country has a whole lot of work
Yes,
to do.
yes.
So let's take our next question. Introduce yourself and ask, please.
My name is Aliasa Atiku Abubakar, and my question lies around the area of people with disabilities. As you have said, education is interconnected with every other sector or every other objective of the Sustainable Development Goals. So let's assume people with disabilities are able to acquire some level of education. My question now is there any structure or any provision for them in order to include them into the mainstream means of acquiring livelihood, or equipping them with some skills to empower them into the mainstream means of acquiring livelihood?
All right.
Thank you.
So
It's a straight no. There is
Dr.
nothing
Dei
on
take
ground.
that.
You don't need any other explanation to that. I don't know of any primary school as we speak today that have brailles for the blind. I don't know of any primary school,
Maybe partially school for the blind. in Lagos.
public primary school, apart from the specialized schools that have entrances or special walkways for disabled. So it's a straight no. There's no policy. I don't know if the honorable will say that, but I don't think there's any deliberate policy to mainstream people with disability into the educational sector. I know that they have specialized schools for the blind, for the deaf, and here and there. But we're talking about generality of the people, especially in the rural areas, who should benefit from this. So I think it should be an area where government should focus. If government can design nomadic programs for the nomads, they should also be able to design, or fishermen, they should also be designed specialized programs for people with disability.
All right, we have some persons sending in questions online. And of course, we have Dr. Stella Obilo, who sent this question from New York. Dr. Stella Obilo, we can see you, even though we may not be able to take you asking the question. Yeah, you can see her smiling there. Dr. Obilo says, please, can you throw more light on how our youth will be motivated to trust Nigerian education and stop the brain drain? That's for Honorable Onoha.
Well, how our youth will be educated?
Will be able to trust Nigerian education rather than wishing to go out for more, for the education, the brain drain.
Well, I think our youth have to be, the government has to open up the system to absorb the youth. Inclusiveness is key at this moment. A lot of the youth are advocating that their problem is even after graduation, they are not being able to be retained. I would suggest that most youths that have graduated from institutions and have distinguished themselves very well could well be retained by the university. Our lecturer who is here knows that over the years, there used to be that policy where if you're a first-class graduate, for instance, your department would automatically keep you, apart from grade A, blue chip companies coming for you.
My nephew was retained by Unilag.
Exactly. So that could be done to improve the desire or the we are working the consciousness of the youth to embrace education. But our problem is not just...
Isn't it more of quality education?
Yes.
Because our universities are not graded favorably on the international market.
Well, if we're talking about the quality of our education, just like we've all said, it won't be a one-stop approach. It's a multi-sectoral approach. It's a hydra-headed issue. You are aware that ASU is talking about their welfare. And that's where this one brings us also to the point where the welfare of the teachers or lecturers come to bear. If lecturers and teachers are made to be role models or like icons of the society, then you see the youth grow up and wanting to be like a teacher or wanting to be like a lecturer. And that's where their welfare comes to bear. I think that their fair dues ought to be paid to them as at when due. And I believe that there has to be constant engagement of this, both the employers and employees, especially as it has to do with the education sector, because it's an area where if there is a dislocation and there is a strike or there is a disagreement, it affects the students. Imagine the number of months that pupils and students have been at home because of the COVID. When you weigh the impact and the performance of the children or students when they come back to school, you will see that there is a clear deviation from what it used to be before. So I think that the welfare of the teachers or the workforce should be put in clear and better perspective.
All right, Dr. Stella Nahobilo, I hope you're satisfied with that answer.
Answering Doctor's question,
yes.
Dr. Stella, one thing you should know is that, just like she said, you cannot take education in isolation from whatever is happening in the country. The brain drain by both lecturers and students wanting to go abroad has to do with our economic conditions, most times,
Welfare.
and the welfare of the entire country.
Security.
So people believe that, a lot of youths believe that by the time they cross over to Europe or to America or to the West, the opportunities are there. What is the essence of having education here and then no employment? She said, she made that point earlier on. But out there, last week somebody called, a friend called me from the US.
But you know that those problems exist out there
Everywhere.
too. It's everywhere.
No.
The US is battling with unemployment. The UK is doing the same.
But our youths have to understand that.
In US, you probably have more than one job.
Yes,
We
because
have friends and families there. You probably have more than one
because
job.
my friend called
That's
me.
what we're discussing now, and the authorities are listening. We
you're
hope
talking
we'll
about
get there. We
employment.
need to take
Do
more
you know in
questions,
Nigeria
Doctor.
today, even if a school should offer a first-class graduate employment, they reject it.
Yes.
I don't want to stay in a system
My
my
nephew did not reject it.
No, that
He-
was-
No, that
that
was then.
was
We are
that,
talking
sir.
about now.
No, I said my nephew.
When?
That means
Okay, let me draw an analogy.
it's not long ago.
a lot of people will reject because the kind of welfare package that is being given to lecturers now is not the future they see. If the Nigerian government wants to prevent a brain drain, we have to start doing things differently.
Yes.
The way people are traveling out of this country is alarming, it's scary. If we don't do something, very soon we won't find any young person in Nigeria. We need to do something. Trust is built over time. When we start doing the right thing, then the people will start trusting the government. It's not hard. It's not rocket science.
It's not only students, even academics. I told you, my friend called me last week and said, "What are you doing there? A professor."
Tell him we have a lot. At least you're encouraging
People
the
who have
ones here.
traveled will
You're
call
giving
you and
them
like,
the
what are
right
you
education.
doing?
Yes, what are you
All
doing?
of these youths that have been on the
What are you
street in
doing?
the last 1 week
Yes.
have people who are encouraging them, people they can look up to. So we need you here.
Yeah. So yes, we want to stay here. That is why we are not going.
Yes.
But we want to be treated like our colleagues elsewhere. You cannot be paying a lecturer $1,000, which is just about 400 and something thousand naira, and then you expect the man to stay. While his contemporary in another country is earning up to $5,000. which will be up to 1 point something million. So it's just like somebody talking about fuel, that because Saudi Arabia is selling fuel at so amount, so Nigeria too should be so. Our income the same with that. So most times
Exchange rates.
our exchange rate the same. So I'm answering Stella. So those are the issues of trust. Once these policies are put on ground, and then people will definitely trust their country.
Trust is built over time.
Yeah.
The government needs to do something differently.
And the youth also need to think out of the box.
Yeah.
Of course.
Because the
and we
crave
have
for white-collar jobs
Jobs.
has to reduce.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
have to be mindful of the fact that there is no
There's no free
lunch anywhere.
anywhere.
There's, in fact, the going out in search of greener pasture. Is there really any greener pasture anywhere these days?
Thank you. I would like to thank all of us at this time, and particularly Honorable Miriam Onoha, member of Nigeria's House of Representatives. Thanks for coming on this program, and we hope to have you here soon again. Of course, Dr. Omale Adoye, lecturer from Bayes University. Thanks for coming on the program. And Joy Aderele, Programs Director, Engine 2 Mexico. Thanks for coming on the program. We'd say that the youths have benefited a lot from you today. Thank you. We hope to have you again soon. And of course, all the youths in the audience, thanks for coming. Next time, prepare with more questions because they are loaded to answer these questions. Well, this is what we draw the curtain on today's special edition of Inside the Parliament, Politics with Value series. Of course, in the next 3 weeks, we'll be coming up with another special edition. But every Wednesday at 3:30, you can join us for Inside the Parliament, issues emanating from not just the federal but state legislature. My name is Uju Ejeye. Thanks for staying with us.